The meeting was already over when I walked in. I could tell by the way my manager refused to meet my eyes. By the way the HR director had positioned herself near the door, like she was blocking an exit she assumed I might run for. And by the way, my boss sat at the head of the conference table with his hands folded, wearing the particular expression of a man who had already rehearsed what he was about to say and was now simply waiting for permission to perform it. I set my coffee down. I pulled out the chair across from him. I sat. "We've made a decision about the VP of Client Strategy role," he said. I nodded. I'd spent 11 years at Calloway Group waiting for those words. 11 years building the agency's client roster from a handful of mid-tier regional accounts into a portfolio that landed us on 3 consecutive industry best of lists. 11 years learning every quirk, every budget cycle, every preference of the clients who had become, in many ways, my clients, my relationships, my work. "We're going with Brandon," he said. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just let the name sit in the air between us. Brandon, his nephew, 26 years old, a marketing degree from a school I'd never heard of, and 8 weeks of employment at Calloway Group, most of which he'd spent asking me to explain what a retainer agreement was and whether the client lunches were expensed before or after the meeting. "He brings a fresh perspective," my boss said. I picked up my coffee. I took a slow sip. I said, "I see." That was all. My manager exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. The HR director shifted her weight. My boss unfolded his hands and started talking about the transition, about how my role would remain important, about how there were other opportunities within the firm. I listened to every word. I did not interrupt. I did not cry, which I could tell surprised them. I did not raise my voice or demand an explanation beyond the one already hanging in the room, unspoken and obvious to everyone present. When he finished, I thanked them for telling me directly. I stood. I picked up my coffee, and I walked back to my office and closed the door quietly behind me. What none of them knew was that I had been expecting something like this for almost 6 months. Not this specifically. Not Brandon, who was new enough that I'd barely registered his name before that morning. But something. Some version of this. Because I had worked alongside my boss long enough to know that he was the kind of man who built his confidence on the talent of the people around him. And that when that confidence became large enough, he started to believe it belonged to him alone. I had watched him do it to 2 other people before me. A creative director who had built the agency's visual identity from scratch, quietly pushed out after his boss accepted an industry award for it. A strategist who had developed the firm's proprietary client framework, which was now printed on the agency's website with no mention of her name. I had watched both of them leave. I had told myself I was different, that I had too much history here, that my contributions were too visible to be erased. I had been wrong about that, but I had not been unprepared. 14 months earlier, I had done something that felt, at the time, like hedging. A quiet, private hedge. The kind you make when you're not ready to admit to yourself that you're already planning your exit. I had registered an LLC, a small, simple thing, a consulting entity, a placeholder, a just in case. I had named it Meridian Advisory Group. No, wait. I had named it Harlow Consulting. Just my middle name, chosen in 10 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon while eating lunch at my desk. I had paid the filing fee, set up a business bank account, and then mostly left it alone. What I had not left alone was the question of whether I could actually do this, whether I had what it would take to run something of my own. And so, over the following year, I had started to build an answer. It began with a conversation. One of my longest-standing clients, a family-owned regional grocery chain that had been with Calloway Group for 7 years, called me one afternoon to discuss their upcoming rebranding cycle. We talked for over an hour. At the end of the call, almost offhandedly, the owner said, "Rachel, I want to be honest with you. We stay with Calloway because of you. If you ever go out on your own, I want you to call me first." I thanked him. I said I'd keep that in mind. I wrote it down in a notebook I kept in my desk drawer. Over the next several months, I had versions of that conversation with 3 other clients. Not soliciting them, never soliciting, because I was still under contract and I respected what that meant. But listening, paying attention to what they said about their relationship with the agency versus their relationship with me. The distinction was not subtle. They scheduled calls around my availability. They sent holiday cards to my name. When Calloway shuffled its account teams during a reorganization 2 years back, 2 clients had called my direct line within 24 hours to ask, specifically, if I was still on their account. I was, but it was the asking that told me something important. By the time I sat across from my boss that Thursday morning and heard him say Brandon's name, I had spoken with an attorney. I had a client transition plan. I had a lease signed on a small shared office space across town, beginning the 1st of next month. I had done everything I could do without crossing a line. And I had stayed behind that line precisely because I wanted to leave with my integrity intact. What my boss had done by promoting his nephew was simply move my timeline up by about 90 days. I did not hand in my notice that day. I gave myself the weekend. I spent it going through everything I knew with clarity and honesty. I was not the kind of person who acted out of anger, and I wanted to be certain I was acting out of something else, something more durable. A real assessment of what was possible and what was right. I talked to my attorney. I reviewed my employment contract carefully, looking at non-solicitation language, at intellectual property clauses, at the specific limitations on post-employment conduct. I knew that contract well. I had negotiated parts of it myself. What I found was that I had been careful enough, over the past 14 months, to stay cleanly on the right side of every relevant provision. I had not taken proprietary materials. I had not made promises to clients. I had not used company resources for anything personal. I had simply been excellent at my job, built genuine relationships, and prepared an alternative legally, ethically, completely. On Monday morning, I submitted my resignation. 3 weeks' notice, as required. I wrote the letters simply and without editorializing. I thanked the firm for the opportunities. I gave a clean, professional end date. I sent it by email and hand-delivered a printed copy to my boss's assistant. The response came 30 minutes later, in person. My boss appeared in my doorway looking like a man who had woken up that morning confident the floor would hold and had just discovered it wasn't attached to anything. "I don't understand," he said. "I've decided to pursue other opportunities," I said. "My last day will be the 22nd. Is this about the promotion?" I looked at him for a moment. He was 61 years old and had run this agency for 24 years, and I had respected him once, genuinely, when I was new enough not to see him clearly. "I think it's just time," I said. He sat down in the chair across from my desk without being invited. This was a habit of his occupying space, as though ownership were a form of permission. "Rachel, you have been essential to this agency. I hope you know that. Essential. Not VP material. Not worth the title, or the salary, or the recognition. But essential, in the way that a good HVAC system is essential. Something you only notice when it stops working." "I appreciate that," I said. He spent the next 40 minutes trying to negotiate. He offered me a different title, Senior Director of Client Relations. He offered a salary adjustment. He offered a seat on the leadership committee, which I knew was not a decision-making body, but a name given to a quarterly meeting, where junior partners were invited to share opinions that were then politely catalogued and ignored. I listened to each offer. I said I was grateful. I told him my decision was final. He left, looking confused. I went back to work. The 3 weeks of my notice period were the strangest of my professional life. A sustained, quiet tension, like the period before a weather system arrives when the air pressure changes and the birds go silent. My colleagues knew something was happening. Brandon, to his credit, had the self-awareness to stay out of my way. My manager checked in on me twice a day with the brittle cheerfulness of someone trying to prevent a fire they could already smell. The HR director scheduled an exit interview for my final week. I spent those 3 weeks doing what I had always done. I finished what was on my plate. I documented my work thoroughly, not for Calloway Group's benefit, but because the clients I served deserved continuity, regardless of how their account was managed after I left. I answered every email. I returned every call. I was, as I had always been, professional. What I did not do was make any representations about the future. My clients called. They asked questions. I answered carefully and honestly. I told them I was leaving the agency. I told them the transition plan the firm had prepared. I told them that decisions about their future representation were entirely theirs to make, and that I was available to discuss their options after my employment ended. I said nothing that could be characterized as solicitation. I said everything that was true. My last day was a Friday. There was a small send-off in the conference room, the good one, on the corner with the city view with a sheet cake and a card that everyone had signed. My boss gave a short speech about my contributions. My manager cried a little, which I think surprised her. I shook hands. I hugged people. I took the framed photo of my nieces off my desk and put it in my bag. I left my key card on the reception desk. On the way out, I walked to my car. I sat in the parking garage for about 4 minutes, doing nothing in particular. Then I drove to my new office. Monday morning, my phone rang at 7:42. It was the grocery chain owner. His company was called Fletcher Family Markets. And he had been a client of mine, not of Calloway Group, of mine since I had cold called his VP of marketing 6 years ago and spent 40 minutes convincing her to give us a meeting. I had managed every campaign, every rebrand concept, every vendor negotiation, every difficult quarter they'd had in the 6 years since. The owner had my personal cell number because I had given it to him 3 years ago after a crisis involving a supplier recall that required responses at 2 in the morning. I had picked up then. I picked up now. I heard you left, he said. I did, I said. I started my own firm. There was a pause. Are you available for a meeting this week? Within 10 days, Fletcher Family Markets had signed a 12-month contract with Harlow Consulting. Their annual budget was the largest I had ever managed independently. Over the following 3 weeks, I had similar conversations with 3 other former clients. A regional healthcare network, a mid-size commercial real estate development firm, a specialty food manufacturer that had been with Calloway for 4 years and had, in their own words, never quite felt like a priority. None of these conversations were difficult. I did not have to pitch hard, or discount my rates, or promise anything I was uncertain I could deliver. I had relationships. I had a track record. I had, in each case, been the person they called when something mattered. By the end of my 2nd month, Harlow Consulting had 4 retainer clients, 2 project-based engagements, and a revenue run rate that would have represented, at its peak, roughly 61% of Calloway Group's total annual billings. I know that number precisely because my attorney had prepared me for the possibility that Calloway Group might look at the client departures and reach for their contract. They did not, because I had been careful, and because what had happened was not poaching. It was a natural consequence of the fact that the relationships had always been mine, not theirs. There is a difference between a firm that has clients and an individual who has relationships that happen to be housed at a firm. Calloway Group had made a fundamental error in confusing the two, and they were now living in the space that error had created. Brandon, from what I heard through the industry network, was struggling. Not maliciously, I didn't wish him poorly, exactly, but structurally. He had been given a title and a client list and no real foundation for what either of those things required. The clients who had stayed were patient at first, then less so. 2 of the 4 accounts that had not followed me left Calloway Group within 60 days for other firms. One sent me an email asking if I had capacity. I did. My boss called me on a Thursday morning, 10 weeks after my last day. I was at my desk reviewing a media plan when his name appeared on my phone. I looked at it for a moment. I let it ring twice more. Then I answered. Rachel, he said. I've been meaning to reach out. Of course, I said. How can I help you? There was a pause, the particular pause of a man unaccustomed to being the one who needs something. I think we both know things haven't gone as smoothly as we hoped with the transition. He said it as though the transition were a weather event, something that had happened to the agency rather than a decision he had made. We've had some client movement. I'm aware, I said. I wanted to have a frank conversation about whether there might be a path for you to come back. He said it quickly, like pulling off a bandage. In a VP capacity. The role you should have had. I heard what was under that sentence. Not the apology it almost was, not the acknowledgement it was attempting to be. Just the math, the stark, plain math of a man who had looked at his revenue projections and done a calculation he wished he hadn't had to make. I appreciate you calling, I said. I do. I think we made a mistake, he said. I think I'll be honest with you. I think I let other considerations influence a decision that should have been straightforward. Other considerations. His nephew. His instinct toward legacy and control, and the particular vanity of men who build something and then mistake continuity with bloodline. He wasn't wrong that it had been a mistake. He was just 11 years too late in being willing to say it. I have something of my own now, I said. I have clients who depend on me, a team I'm starting to build. I've signed leases and contracts and made commitments. I can't undo that, and honestly, I wouldn't want to. What would it take? He asked. Name it. I thought about what to say for a moment, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to say it right honestly, without cruelty, with the particular care I had spent 11 years developing for situations that required precision. It's not about what it would take, I said. It's that this isn't the right answer for me anymore. I think you built something real at Calloway Group. I think there are good people there who deserve strong leadership, but that's going to have to come from somewhere else. He said nothing for a moment. I genuinely hope it goes well for you, I said. And I hope Brandon finds his footing. He's young. He has time. There was a long silence. Then, quietly, you've done very well. I have, I said. Thank you for calling. I set my phone down on my desk. Through the window of my small office, I could see the street below a coffee cart, a woman walking a dog, two people in business clothes, moving with the particular urgency of people who are late for something they believe matters. The city doing what it always did, indifferent and continuous. I had spent a long time waiting to be seen clearly by people who were looking past me. What I hadn't understood, for most of those years, was that being unseen had given me something they hadn't accounted for. It had given me time to build, quietly, time to understand what I had and what it was worth, time to prepare for a moment I hoped wouldn't come but knew, on some level, was always possible. People talk about revenge like it's a fire, something hot and immediate, something you set and watch burn. But what I had done didn't feel like that. It felt more like architecture, like spending years laying a foundation that no one could see, and then simply choosing, one day, to build on top of it. The company had given my promotion to someone who had been there 8 weeks. They had made their calculation, and I had respected it by making mine. I pulled up my client files and went back to work. I had a presentation to finish by end of day, a new hire to interview on Friday, and a fourth quarter strategy call with Fletcher Family Markets, first thing tomorrow morning. The best decisions, I had come to believe, are the ones that require no announcement, no speech, no moment where you look back over your shoulder to see if anyone noticed. You simply do the work that was always in you, in the space that finally belongs to you, and let the rest settle where it will. I had stopped waiting for someone to recognize what I was worth. I had decided to become someone who no longer needed them to.